Ahoy! Every time the New World team announces a poor decision or doesn't live up to expectations, we end up getting one or more of these kinds of videos. Is New World dying? Is New World dead? Is this the worst patch we've ever had? And so on. This goes as far back as New World's official launch, if we were to believe Josh Strife Hayes. However, with New World's latest announcement, it feels like the final nail in the coffin for many of the current players. Many of them don't have the expectation that New World Aeternum will be a rebirth either. I want to dig a little bit deeper into the data and also talk about some other signs that are on the horizon. This, for example, includes what would happen if who is in charge of New World changes. The first thing to look at are, of course, the Steam charts. Here we can surprisingly see not much of a difference after the announcement compared to before. The peaks were around 7,000 before and they are still around 7,000. And the lows were around 4,000-ish. It was slightly more beforehand, but really not a very significant difference yet at least. There's something very important worth keeping in mind with these numbers though. They're often mistaken as the average players per day or total players. They're not. They are concurrent player numbers, meaning how many players are playing the game at the exact same time of the day. So you have your spikes at the time when most people are playing, and usually you'll probably have a lot more players in total than these numbers are, because many people will just not play exactly at peak time and be online at different times, and they wouldn't go into this maximum number. And this is important because I believe that people quitting after the announcements were likely not playing all that much beforehand anyways. I think most long-term players that are really frustrated with the news we're getting are simply not logging in that much and being online all day at the moment because there really is no reason to. What are you going to do? People that are unhappy with the current content are not going to sit in OPR for 10 hours per day. Sure, they will log in here and there and maybe do something that they feel like doing in that very moment, maybe do some form of daily activity, maybe just check the trading post, but that doesn't necessarily have to be at peak times, so they would be relatively hard to see in this graph, which means it would also be hard to see if they quit. Whereas for people that, for example, are happy to do daily chest runs at peak time, that would be reflected in these charts, not as much would change. If you're happy to do that activity at the moment, then you wouldn't be as frustrated by the announcement in comparison because you're already doing the thing you like anyways. To expand upon that, I want to show the poll from the other day as well, where we had a pretty significant portion of people voting that they are quitting due to the lack of upcoming content. If we zoom out and look at the bigger picture here, then we can obviously very significant player bleed over the previous month as well. And I think that is much more important. I think the announcement was something that really frustrated people that were still waiting and hoping for something, but many people had already given up hope prior to that and had already quit. So in that sense, the whole announcement was just another stepping stone on the downward spiral, which may also explain once again why they didn't really care about the PC players very much in how they handled the announcement. But that's not the only thing happening, and before I talk about that more, consider subscribing and clicking the bell if you're interested in videos like this. One of New World's long-term employees, he was also active in the Discord occasionally and gave us information. Delacron is leaving New World. We don't know if he quit or if he was fired, but either way, the outcome's the same. Simultaneously, Amazon Games put up a recruitment post for a new community manager very recently, though that doesn't directly specify that it's for New World, it might not be. So we're seeing some small shifts with employees here, but we're also seeing a much bigger shift, and that is the opening of their new studio. In case you missed it, Amazon Games is opening a new studio in Bucharest, led by Christian Pana. Christian Pana was involved with games such as Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, Avatars, Frontiers of Pandora, Far Cry 6 and Soul Calibur 4. His new studio is hiring a bunch of people already, as you can see here, and those listings originally included a mention of New World Aeternum, which was then removed because New World Aeternum wasn't even announced yet. This is particularly interesting because New World always seemed to have problems filling the positions that they had listed, with many staying open for a month. And part of that is probably because most of them are in California, which is very expensive to live in, and they don't seem to offer any remote work, at least not according to the listings. If that is the case, then it's going to be very difficult to attract skilled talent unless you're willing to pay a very high premium for having them live in California. And that is something that won't be an issue for them in Bucharest, so it'll likely be much easier for them to get people there, and they will probably have to pay them less. At the same time, I think it will be fairly difficult to attract talent from outside of Romania into Romania, so you're mostly going to be stuck with the people that live there already. Which isn't inherently a bad thing, but obviously limits your potential talent pool, similar to the California location, just in another way. One of the resulting theories is that New World will eventually be completely moved over to Bucharest because of this, whereas the original team would be moved over to the Lord of the Rings MMO instead. While this is very much a possibility, I will ask you this. Do you think that the New World team in the current state, with how things are working internally, would be the team that Amazon would assign to the Lord of the Rings MMO without making any changes beforehand? I personally don't think so. But it could also be that part of the issues is because part of the team is already distracted with the Lord of the Rings MMO, who knows. On that topic, I often see suggestion to fire Scot Lane and then the game will be good. Scott is most certainly an easy target because he is the face of the company, he announces all of the decisions, but I don't know if he's really the one in charge, if he's really the one calling the shots and making these decisions, or if he's just the scapegoat. We know that there are people above Scott within Amazon Games, and we know that there's Amazon, which is more directly in charge of what Amazon Games does because they provide them with the money to do those things. And since both games use the same engine, I believe that Amazon especially makes many of their decisions more with a focus on what benefits Lord of the Rings the most, so they can progress with that, explaining things like the Slayer script overhaul, the focus on console, and many other back-end stuff that was heavily prioritized. All of these things may have been things that Scott was simply told to do. They just said, this is your job for the next half year, this is what we want, you deliver that, or you don't get money. So go ahead and do that. And he wouldn't have much of a say. And then, of course, he is instructed to sell it to the player base, so he can't be like, oh, actually, I'm sad that I'm doing this. He has to present it with a happy face. And as such, I find it impossible to tell if Scott is what's the main influence behind what we have been seeing. Based on that, I also don't know if someone else spearheading the company would make any difference in that regard, because if they have to follow the same people above them, it might not change anything at all. But realistically, based on what we know, I don't think New World can die that easily. The only way that New World could die a really quick death is if Amazon pulls their funding. This could happen, for example, because they just don't see New World as profitable enough, or it could happen because they decide to no longer do the Lord of the Rings MMO and no longer build upon the engine that they're working on because they no longer see a point in it. At that point, I think New World would just not vanish overnight, but very quickly stop functioning because it would be very clear that there would no longer be updates in the future at all. And with the game currently pivoting more in that single player direction, the solo gameplay, it's very unclear what will happen to updates in the future as well, because we don't know if we can still expect traditional seasonal MMO updates. But even if we were to assume that the console launch fails completely, there's a good chance they might just run the game on live support through Bucharest and just keep it going, extract what money they can from it before slowly letting it crumble away. It would, in my eyes, make very little sense to do this whole big move of the console port, which is a lot of work, a lot of time invested, to then just immediately say, we're dumping it here, because from a profitability standpoint, that's not the best move you can make. So while I'm sure the PC player base hasn't hit rock bottom yet and will go further down, I think the death of New World would still be quite a while away, just because the console players who get a completely new experience will keep it afloat until then. But that doesn't mean that videos about New World's impending doom won't make a very clickable title until then. Similarly, I'm sure that many of the creators specifically, not the players, but the creators who are quitting at the moment, will be back for the New World Aeternum release anyways, because it's kind of easy content. There's of course nothing wrong with dipping your toes into other games in between though. I might, for example, have a look at Taras Land. I'm sure that will be pay to win at some point, but up until that point it might be an enjoyable experience for a while, and it'll bring me closer to the New World Aeternum release date anyways. But also I have a couple of predictions regarding New World's future that I'd like to share with you. I'll do that in a new video in the next days, so consider subscribing and clicking the bell if you want to get notified. If you'd like to support me further, you can do so on Patreon. Thanks to all of my patrons who already do exactly that. I appreciate you very much. And thank you all for watching. Sloth, out.